Today, I'm going to talk about the 3 horsemen of boring adventures and low energy sessions. Nothing could go wrong, right? Right? If you still believe a session 0 is a big waste of time, then you are probably not running a proper session 0, just like I wasn't. Suddenly, my inbox pings and there it was, a 10-page character backstory. I flipped. I flipped. But how to co-create characters' backstories and campaign plots? Hello and welcome to the Deep Dice Press. We are a bunch of friends on their 30s who have played D&D since our teen years and who love role-playing and storytelling. On a given day, it just so happened that we were all going through career transitions and thought, why not give a shot on developing D&D products? And that's how our indie D&D publisher was born, small in size, but big in aspirations. Our purpose is to take your D&D adventures to the magical excitement and deep immersion we experience with the epic tales and narratives of humankind. If you find this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the bell to receive notifications of new videos with similar content. You can also find the links for our social media on the description down below. Today, I'm going to talk about a dire subject. Today, I'm going to talk about those that hide in the shadows of every Dungeon Master bookshelf. Today, I'm going to talk about the 3 plagues that haunt the darkest corners of the mind of every GM. Today, I'm going to talk about the 3 horsemen of boring adventures and low energy sessions. Okay, maybe they're not that much dramatic after all, but those 3 common mistakes can make your D&D game actually suck. So we're going to talk about what they are, why they're a problem, and what I did to deliver exciting adventures and high-energy sessions. I'm going to talk about 1. How to never start your D&D sessions with a low energy again, and what I do to kick off my own D&D adventures. 2. How to make sure you're not DMing meaningless adventures, and how a proper session 0 can prevent that. And 3. How not to write meaningless characters' backstories, and instead write meaningful ones. Once I started to apply all of those with my D&D group, we were able to consistently have high-energy D&D sessions and increased player engagement in our D&D campaign. I hope that sharing what we did to get there may be helpful for you too. So, join us, won't you? Let's start talking about how a bad beginning can kill the vibe of a game session and what I did to never start my D&D sessions with a low energy again. I was about to start playing D&D again after probably some 10 years. Fresh group and new characters, pen and paper, character sheets, shining never-used dice, and even miniatures. I could feel the excitement in the air. My character was a tiefling rogue who worked for the Dockers Guild of Suzeo, which was secretly a criminal organization trying to overthrow the crown. The DM set up his screen and mentioned that I had received a note inviting me to the home of a retired adventurer, along with other characters who would then become our party. Her son's ship had been assaulted by an undead crew on the Sea of Fallen Stars. The undead pirates were known to have occupied an ancient dungeon in one of those islands, filled with dangers. She offered a reward for those brave enough to rescue and avenge her son. I'm out, I thought. I'm so out. That's what I really thought. I mean, what? Risking my diabolically soft tiefling skin on a dungeon in the middle of nowhere for the son of someone I didn't even know? I mean, sorry lady, I got more important stuff to do around here, among them a cocoa and coffee tiefling skincare routine and a revolution to prepare for. But that's not what I said. I went along with it, not to spoil everyone's fun. And it was a fun adventure after all, but I really don't think that my character would ever get involved in that hot mess to start with. And that was not the kind of story that I really wanted to help our group to tell. And because of that, I don't think I put as much energy as I would have if I were more engaged. I think that the DM noticed that, and I think that it was a bit of a frustrating experience for both of us. And here's why I think that was a terrible adventure hook. If I, as a player, feel that my character doesn't care for the story and quests he's facing, I'm immediately less engaged. And that's a big step towards a low-energy, boring game session. I started to pay much more attention on how I build my adventure hooks when I realized how important they are to kick off a game session with a great energy and with high player engagement. For me, a great adventure hook is one that is compelling for my character's goals and motivations, usually because it is somehow closely tied to my character's backstory. A great adventure hook immediately creates a deep connection of my character with the adventure and raises my curiosity and engagement. And that's a big step towards a high-energy, exciting game session. In other words, great adventure hooks are those that have a great fit with the characters of our party and the players of our D&D group. There are certain moments in a D&D table in which everybody is on board and we're able to reach a certain flow state where we're collectively telling an extraordinary story. If you have experienced sessions like that, you know how memorable they become. When they happen, every piece of the session seems to have a perfect fit, from great role-playing to exciting dialogues to epic storytelling. Once you've experienced sessions like that, you get kind of addicted. You know they're special, but you want them to happen more and more often. That was what made me think hard on what I could do to create the best possible environment for role-playing and storytelling in my game table. One thing that I learned was to pay much attention at the start of my adventures. I think that the first impression of an adventure sets the starting energy of a game. If you start on a low, it's so hard to raise it throughout the session. And if you start on a high, it's so much easier to keep it up and set the ground for those special flow moments to happen. That's why for me it's so important to carefully craft a great adventure hook. After all, it sets the first impression of your game session. And I learned to do that playing casual game sessions. For instance, some time ago, a group of 4 friends came to visit me. The plan was to play in one-off D&D session in the afternoon and then have drinks at night. We wouldn't have much time, so I just pitched one of the plots that I imagine when I'm taking showers. An old noble seemed to have been framed by a rival and taken into prison by a crime he didn't commit. He used to be a war veteran and a skilled swordsmaster. The quest, as you can imagine, was proving his innocence. Everyone was comfortable with the plot, so I asked them to create characters around it, and they did. One of them would be the noble's young daughter, another would be one of his old friends, a third one of his disciples. The last character would be an investigator who used to be a war veteran just like the nobleman and who believed on his innocence. This kind of setup looked like a small detail to me at first. But then I started to always work together with my players to tie their characters' backstories into my plots. And I learned that the best adventure hooks are the ones that actually matter for their characters. It doesn't matter if it's a casual one-off or the beginning of an epic campaign. I learned to always make my adventures about the player characters. I understood that making sure the characters are absolutely connected with the story from its very beginning is one of the most important things I could do to engage my players and start sessions with a high energy. And many times, that's what you need to set apart a great session from a lousy one. Even when I was able to kick off an adventure with high energy and great play engagement, I would quickly run out of gas if my players didn't care about the adventure. So, I'll talk about why that would happen, how I managed to stop DMing meaningless adventures, and how I realized I could prevent that as long as I stopped using the wrong approach for my session 0. So, here's the worst D&D campaign I've ever played. Everyone was initially excited, but as the sessions went by, our group grew quieter and quieter and quieter, up to the point when everyone was really detached from the adventure. There were very good reasons for our initial excitement. First, we had a great D&D group composed of experienced players who had played on previous editions and who had returned to play in 5th edition. Second, we were about to start our first long-term campaign after an entire year of sporadic play. And lastly, we were going to play Rime of the Frost Maiden, a module that had just been launched and whose setting had a strong emotional appeal with all of us, as we all had gone through our late high school and early university years playing Icewind Dale, the video game. Nothing could go wrong, right? Right? Well, it did. We had already visited most of the 10 towns and many locations in the Icewind Dale. Our initial excitement of exploring the region was replaced by what I'm gonna label sandbox blues. Now, sandbox blues is what players who love role-playing and storytelling feel when they suffer a long exposure of sandbox adventures, which are most fit for players who love exploration and world building. But what really made us be done with it was the Sunblight quest, a nearby Duergar fortress which was planning to wreck the whole region. We didn't even raise an eyebrow with that quest. The whole thing felt very frustrating for us. We couldn't tell how it would connect with the main plot or with any other quest we had played so far, or even worse, with any of our characters. I mean, we get it, let's go there and save the whole region, but man, we had been so excited to play an entire campaign. We had put quite an effort on building cool characters and backstories. By then, we were confronted with the harsh reality. Nothing that we were going through had to do with our characters' personal stories, goals, or motivations. We realized the campaign's story didn't really matter for the characters we had built, and because of that, we, the players, were struggling to connect with the adventure. And if it didn't matter for our characters, it would never matter for us, the players. That short and terrible campaign brought us a key insight, the clear sense of how important it was to make our adventures matter for our player characters. It was that experience that made us start building our homebrew campaigns around our player characters' backstories, in order to make sure they would be closely related to the campaign story. We started to use session 0 of new campaigns to brainstorm together characters' backstories and campaign plots. We found that approach to be the best way to engage our characters with the story. And we found that when we do so, the players ourselves immediately get engaged, and that engagement is the fuel we need to consistently have high-energy D&D sessions. We realized that great characters and great adventures alone are not enough. And I do think that Rime of the Frost Maiden is a great adventure. If I want my players to care about my adventures and have high-energy sessions, I gotta make sure that the story that we're telling is actually about the stars of the show, their characters. Do you already build your campaign plots starting from the characters' backstories? Have you ever thought using your session 0 for that? If you still believe a session 0 is a big waste of time, then you are probably not running a proper session 0, just like I wasn't. I was finally able to unlock its full potential when our D&D group started to use our session 0 to brainstorm characters' backstories and campaign plots together. It had been a while since I introduced a short session 0 before starting new campaigns, especially if some of the players didn't know each other. It used to be really simple, many times via Zoom, so we would establish some common grounds. Things like house rules, play style, flavor of fantasy or genre, and campaign setting. That would align expectations, make sure we would all be playing the same game, and give a direction of which story I, as a dungeon master, could develop, and which characters the players would build. And that was how we did up to the point when I turned our session 0 into a full session, where we would not only discuss those issues, but actually co-create characters and campaign plot points. And what I mean by plot point here is something very general, such as a horde of barbarian orcs, threaten to invade the kingdom. But that feels to me as a story I would enjoy to develop, and to the players, a story they would enjoy to play. Before session 0, I drafted an initial list of plot points, some of them totally unrelated, and some of them that could be actually tied together into a single campaign. I also stimulate my players to bring initial ideas for characters that they would enjoy to play, and then we discuss all those ideas together. Well, that sounds like a lot of work and hard to sort out, you might say, or, oh, that's one of those approaches in which the players take part of the DM's roles then. Neither of them, actually. Here's exactly how our session 0 worked for me and my character in my groups. As I listen to the characters' backstories, what I'm doing as a dungeon master is actively looking for opportunities to tie their characters to the plot points I have in mind, as well as adventure hooks, NPCs, and pieces of lore that could leverage in future stories for the campaign. I also make suggestions and ask for some changes in order to create the necessary links. And while I do make sure that the players enjoy the plot points that we'll be playing, after all, they gotta like the story that we are going to tell together, I avoid disclosing specifically who are the villains or any adventures that I have in mind. I really do believe this approach brings together the best of two different worlds. On one hand, I don't give up the prerogatives and responsibilities of the DM, and I make sure that I keep the suspense and surprise of the campaign concealed from the players. On the other hand, working on character backstories and campaign plots together makes sure that we reach a result that is better as we build on each other's idea, more aligned as we discard what we collectively don't like as stories to tell, and most importantly, we make sure that everyone is super engaged and super excited with our campaign before we have even started it. And in the end, I actually think it reduces the workload for me as a dungeon master, as I'm using this session to brainstorm and get ideas and inspirations for many adventures ahead. What do you think? Wanna give it a shot? Fair enough. By now, I think you'll dig why we like to kick off our D&D homebrew campaigns, running a session 0 to tie the characters' backstories into the campaign plots. But this approach will not work if my group creates meaningless characters' backstories. So let me share with you what, in my point of view, makes a backstory suck and how my D&D group learned to write meaningful backstories for our campaigns. Be careful not to get carried away and write long, pointless characters' stories. If you've played D&D for a while, chances are you've seen someone bring in an extensive and detailed backstory for their character. There goes someone determined to make their character come alive. But something like that can quickly become a frustrating experience both for player and DM. A long and comprehensive backstory may still be a meaningless backstory. The first time that happened to me, I was really stunned. It was a Friday night and I was racing against time to finish prepping our campaign kickoff for the next morning. Suddenly, my inbox pings and there it was. a 10-page character backstory. I flipped. I flipped. First of all, I didn't even have the time to read all of that. And second of all, now? Really? What was I supposed to do with that? I had already planned a handful of the adventures. Whatever would I do with all that new lore? Where and how would I fit that into our campaign? But it got worse. There was not even a theme match between that backstory and our campaign. It had to do with legends of old dragons and magic items, the opposite of what I had planned for our campaign. Subtle, low fantasy, low magic adventures. I could barely sleep that night. How to even talk about that with my player? Should I talk to him at all? I mean, he had put much time and energy building that backstory. He would probably arrive in our session full of excitement, crazy to roleplay his character. What a bummer that would be. On the other hand, imagine we playing several sessions ahead and nothing of that 10-page backstory showing up in our campaign. He would feel all his effort had been in vain. Either way, I felt I would have a character and a player very disconnected from our story. And what a disgraceful outcome to a rare and welcome effort. What had gone wrong? Well, like most of the problems in a D&D table, what went wrong was that me, the DM, and my players hadn't talked enough to each other to make sure we were in the same page. A very important session 0 was missing. But the precise reason for that was an old habit. I think that most DMs and players are used to creating their campaigns and characters' backstories apart from each other. In the best case scenario, the DM usually establishes a campaign theme and players talk a bit to each other to streamline their backstories, but that's typically not enough. What I most hear from my fellow players and DMs are characters' stories, goals and motivations only loosely related to the campaign plots. That is not how storytelling is built in other media, and there's a reason for that. We establish our connection to a given story through its main characters. We see the world through their eyes and feel their feelings. In D&D, that is even more important as players are audience, actors, and writers of their story, all at once. It's hard to have a high-energy game if they are not highly engaged and immersed into the story. In short, to achieve great player engagement, which fosters great role-playing and storytelling in a D&D campaign, players must feel they actually are the main characters of the story. A meaningful character backstory is not a long or detailed one. A meaningful backstory is one that is closely tied with the main story plot. So that's how I learned to make sure we'd have engaged game tables and high-energy game sessions, making our characters actually care about the story, about our story, and making my players actually care about their characters. Me and my players started to co-create our campaign plots and characters' backstories together from the very beginning. That's how we made our characters the stars of our show, running a proper session 0. As a dungeon master, I hate to give up my control over this story, but it was very clear to me that I wanted my players to be fully engaged on the development of our campaign plot. Tough spot, but I found a way to make that work through a simple and direct approach. But how to co-create characters' backstories and campaign plots? I think that a good way to answer that is with a practical example from one of my recent campaigns. This time, our group had been playing together for quite some months. The former DM had changed jobs, would have less available time and wanted to become a player. So I offered myself to be a DM as long as we could all work together on the campaign on a session 0. Even before that, we agreed on some guidelines. We would play a homebrew high fantasy campaign in the Forgotten Realms. We were all feeling like playing something adventurous and epic with some comic relief, but not goofy. We wanted something with an Indiana Jones feeling. I was going to work on plot ideas and asked all players to work on character sketches. so that we could pitch them to one another during our session 0. So I pictured a campaign that would feel like a road movie, where the locations would be as important to the story as the characters. I wanted it to be fast-paced, but at the same time intriguing and mysterious. I also wanted to bring mythical creatures as the main antagonists, such as mummies and minotaurs and medusas. And everyone immediately bought into that idea. Then they presented their character ideas to me. One of them was an archaeologist wizard, clearly inspired in Dr. Aphra from the Star Wars comics, an ex-convict shadow monk, a death cleric, and an indebted pirate rogue. All of them had their own tweaks and twists, and we got really excited, but then when we considered all of them together, we looked at each other and thought, oh, this starting point could take us to a point that we had already experienced before. Characters and adventures too unrelated for us to have tight, exciting game sessions. How could we make that work? Well, that's what the session 0 is for. So we took a deep breath and started to sort it out. I was confident that discussing as a group, one idea would spark another, allowing us to expand, adapt, and select the best of them. And that's exactly what happened. We worked our initial pitches to make them grow, expand, and converge into a single story that came out more or less like that. The Shadow Monk received news that his old master had been turned into stone in an expedition to an underground ruin. He asked some questions in the criminal world and found out that an archaeologist wizard might know the possible causes and cures for that. His investigation also attracted the attention of a death cleric who had a lead. A death knight, responsible for murdering his family, was raiding ancient tombs in search of magical objects for his collection. He knew the death knight was in possession of the elixir of the Medusa, which could save the Shadow Monk's old master. He also knew what could be the death knight's next targets, but all of them were scattered along the sea of fallen stars. Lucky for them, the archaeologist wizard knew a rogue pirate in need of coin who would be willing to take the party around in her ship. Thus, a daring journey started, taking the 4 of them to mysterious ruins filled with mythical creatures and treasures and archaeological rarities as they sought for the cure for purification and tried to thwart the actions of the Death Knight. I went back home super stoked to write the first adventure and prepare the first session. The players went home stoked to build the characters that they had drafted together in that session. What could have been a low-energy, dispersed campaign start turned out quite the opposite. An exciting story starring larger-than-life characters with colorful personalities. And you know what I like the best about that? We were all playing the very game and the very characters that we originally wanted to play. See how a proper session 0 can change the course of your campaign? Have you ever tried to run a similar session 0, or do you still think it's a waste of time? We talked about a lot of things, so let's try to wrap it up. I used to make 3 common mistakes that many times would result in a boring D&D adventure for me and my players. I'm terrified of low-energy game sessions, possibly because I've experienced some extraordinary sessions where everyone on the table knew exactly what to do and say all the time, as if we were in a certain flow state. I don't think it's possible that all my D&D sessions be like that, but I do think it's possible to consistently deliver high-energy sessions with great play engagement with 3 simple steps. Number 1, never start your D&D sessions with a low energy. I find it so hard to make a turnaround if I start an adventure on a low. That's why I started to pay lots of attention on adventure hooks. A great adventure hook is compelling for characters' goals and motivations, and there's a reason why that's so important. That's what immediately raises the player's curiosity and engagement. I learned that making my adventures hooks about the player characters was one of the most important things I could do to engage players and start my D&D sessions on a high. Number 2, stop DMing meaningless adventures. I've DM'd great adventures with interesting stories that turned out to be meaningless to my players. If the story didn't matter for the characters my players had built, it would hardly matter for my players. That's why we started to build our homebrew campaigns around our player characters' backstories. We began to use session 0 of new campaigns to brainstorm together both characters' backstories and campaign plots, tying one to another. That made sure that everyone would be super engaged and super excited with our campaign before we had even started. And that was the fuel we needed to consistently have high-energy D&D sessions. Number 3, stop writing meaningless characters' backstories. A meaningful character backstory is not a long or detailed one. A meaningful character backstory is one that is closely tied with the story plot. Why? Players see the world through the eyes of their characters and feel their feelings. If the characters' stories, goals, and motivations they have created have true impact on the story's development, the players get much more engaged. And engaged players bring outstanding role-playing and storytelling moments to the table. They make the story light up and come alive. Try that out. Be mindful of your adventure hooks to start your session on a high. Unlock the potential of your session 0. Put some time and effort to co-create with your players meaningful adventures and meaningful characters' backstories. You will never have low-energy, boring D&D sessions ever again. Wanna bet? Use those 3 steps and tell me how it was. If you're interested in the content of this video and would like to know more about it, click on the link on the description below to download for free our booklet Make Your Character Matter. You can also find more related content in our social networks. All links are available in the description below. If you want to check out a module where we apply all concepts discussed in this channel, look out for our new campaign, The Kingdom of Cormyr, One Purple Raven, available this fall. Clicking on the screen, you may find more videos on how to create exciting D&D adventures and characters. What makes a D&D campaign good at role-playing and storytelling, and why your character backstory is the most important thing in your D&D adventure. Our next video is why your D&D players are too quiet on your game sessions. If you think it might be interesting for you, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell to receive notifications for new content. This video makes part of our series on how to create great D&D campaigns. In this series, we discuss what we believe to be the core elements of an outstanding D&D campaign for players who enjoy role-playing and storytelling, great characters and great stories. In the Great Characters videos, we talk about the importance of backstories, allies, bringing the party together, and how to connect all of that into an outstanding D&D campaign. In the Great Stories videos, we discuss topics such as building up tension and suspense, plot lines, plot twists, villains and patrons, as well as advanced storytelling techniques. And yet, the best way to create great adventures is getting inspiration from great ideas. So be sure to share your great ideas and experiences in the comments down below. Have you ever tied your characters' backstories into your campaign plots? How did it go? I'm sure your experience will inspire not only us, but many others. Thank you for sharing this moment with us. We are the Deep Dice Press.